I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch. The show that you all know brings you a report on what President Trump has been up to during the past week, and especially with respect to the destruction of the rights and liberties of the American people, as well as our safety and well-being. Of course, the big news is that President Trump launched a bombing attack on Iran. Now, of course, some of the right-wing supporters of President Trump says this is not an act of war, Jacob. This is just a bombing attack. Well, that is what war is. I guarantee you that if, say, Cuba or Venezuela were to fly a couple of bombers over American skies and drop bombs on American nuclear facilities or on any facilities, that would be considered an act of war. Now, I think it's important to talk about basics here before I go into an analysis of what I think is really happening here. The basics are, well, let's begin with the Constitution. The Constitution is an external law that we, the people of the United States, place on federal government officials. Now, they have the authority to enact laws, which they do, that control our activity. Some of these laws are illegitimate, like drug laws, totally illegitimate, certainly not authorized by the Constitution. But we're expected to obey their laws. When we disobey their laws, they put us in jail or fine us. But the Constitution is an external law that we, the people of the United States, place on the government officials. And they're supposed to obey our laws the same way that we're expected to obey their laws. And the Constitution made it very clear from the very beginning that a president cannot legally go to war against another nation state without first securing a declaration of war from Congress. That's why there was a declaration of war in World War II and World War I, the Spanish-American War, and other wars, because that's what the external law, the law of the Constitution, requires. But as we all know, President Trump, along with other presidents, just ignores this external law. Nothing happens to him. There's no impeachment, which there should be when a president intentionally violates the external law, the law of the Constitution that we the people impose on him. But that doesn't happen. And of course, the judiciary is not going to get involved with respect to putting an injunction or a declaration that what he's done is illegal. In other words, presidents have come to the point in our nation's history where they just feel they have the prerogative of ignoring the external law, the law of the Constitution that we the people put on them. The law is very clear that once a president secures a congressional declaration of war, then he can launch a war against another nation state. So the first thing we need to note about this, not that it's going to make any difference, but it's important to at least make people aware that this is an illegal action under our form of government. It's also an illegal action under the principles against wars of aggression that was set forth at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. I mean, this is why they went after German officials, because they attacked countries that had not attacked Germany. And that was what was called a war of aggression. And of course, this is what we have here. There's no evidence that Iran had ever attacked the United States, was planning on attacking the United States. And yet the United States launched a war against this nation state in violation of these principles set forth at Nuremberg. Now, let me give you my commentary as to what I think is really going on here. We know that the U.S. is deeply involved in the Israeli government's actions, furnishing weaponry and so forth with respect to its operations in Gaza, which, of course, makes the situation much less safe for Americans. It's just a classic example of how foreign interventionism, which is what both liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans favor, this whole system of empire and intervention and foreign aid to foreign regimes, makes life unsafe for Americans. It's not safe for Americans to travel overseas because there is so much animosity, not just against the Israeli government, but against the U.S. government, which has furnished the armaments. And of course, there's now the ever-present threat of a terrorist attack here on American soil. We saw this 20 years ago. Here at FFF, we were warning people that if the U.S. government continued killing mass numbers of people or any numbers of people in Iraq with its brutal system of sanctions, that the result would be a terrorist attack on American soil. And along with, of course, embroiling itself with the Israeli government operations, which it was doing 20 years before and even before that, that people get angry over that, and so they retaliate. And since many times they lack the military capability of striking at the U.S. military, which is the most powerful military in history, they resort to acts of terrorism. And so the people who end up paying the price are like the people on 9/11, people in New York, and to a certain extent they're in Washington. Some would argue that, hey, that the military is a legitimate target in war, but regardless, there's no question about the fact that the 9/11 attacks were a direct consequence of U.S. interventionism, which proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that U.S. interventionism makes life very, very dangerous and precarious for the American people. And then, of course, we look at all the terrible destruction of our civil liberties after that event. The USA Patriot Act with its destruction of privacy, warrantless searches. You've got the TSA. Look at the experience people now have going to the airport, how horrifically unpleasant it is. And then, of course, the mass secret surveillance schemes. And so now we're looking at, again, is the specter of a possible terrorist attack on American soil, possibly with drones. As we've learned, people can smuggle in drones or parts of drones, put them together here. And imagine a massive multi-city terrorist attack with drones that have been secretly smuggled into the United States by people that are seeking revenge. And of course, the risk is the not just the Patriot Act 2 or reinforcement of the TSA or more secret surveillance schemes. The risk now is that we live under a president that has shown a proclivity for suspending habeas corpus and due process of law. We've seen that in the area of immigration. And all Trump would need is a national emergency involving a terrorist attack. And I'm not the only one saying this. The U.S. government has now officially published an announcement of the dangers of a terrorist attack here in the United States. So we're not just talking about pie-in-the-sky possibilities. And if it happens, you can imagine the fear, the same fear, people getting scared that the terrorists are coming to get us that we saw after 9/11. And at that point, reasoning is in very short supply. And so that's why at this point we continue to emphasize here at FFF the critical importance of civil liberties, and specifically these two linchpins of a free society, due process of law and habeas corpus. Because if Trump were to declare a national emergency in the height of all the hype that comes with a terrorist attack, it's pretty much like gun rights. Once people lose their gun rights or surrender their gun rights, it's a mistake they make only once, because the government doesn't give people a chance to make the mistake twice. It's not going to give them back their guns, and there's a very good chance the government's not going to give people back their habeas corpus or their due process of law. And so now is the time, not after the emergency. It's too late then, because people are freaking out and they're frightened, they're scared, they're willing to surrender their rights and their liberties for the sake of what appears to be security and safety. Now is the time to make people aware, to raise people awareness of due process of law and habeas corpus. And we already know that the national security establishment set up a camp at Guantanamo Bay. They destroyed right of trial by jury, and of course where they have indefinite detention. So all of the pieces are there for a major, major destruction of the rights and liberties of the American people. And and I know that most of us got into this in the libertarian movement, because of economic liberty, the welfare state, the managed economy, the Federal Reserve, the paper money system. But the essential prerequisite to achieving economic liberty and monetary liberty is you've got to have habeas corpus and due process of law. You lose those, and we might as well just kiss away any chance of economic liberty in our lifetime. So that's why we continue to emphasize the importance of civil liberties, and in fact, we're planning a conference, an online conference. We did one 4 years ago on civil liberties, but it's so important. We consider it so important that we're planning another one. In fact, if you can help us out with our mid-year fundraising drive, we'd be most appreciative. Now, let me talk about what I think is going on here. People keep saying that President Trump has bombed Iran, President Trump has done this, which is kind of interesting because we all know that Trump ran for president on this big anti-war kick. He was appealing to libertarians. I'm anti-war, and a lot of libertarians fell for it. They got on the Trump bandwagon, and Trump's anti-war, Trump's a libertarian, and all this, and so all of a sudden here he is bombing another country, and of course furnishing the Israeli government with massive amounts of weaponry for it to engage in its operations in Gaza. And in other words, same old, same old. I mean, nothing's really changed. But the assumption behind all this is that Trump has made these decisions. I don't believe so. Those of you that are familiar with my work at FFF know that I have long maintained that it is not the president who is in charge in this country, especially with respect to foreign policy. It is the national security state, the national security establishment, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. And you all know that I've long recommended a book in this area that confirms this thesis, that it is the national security establishment that is running the show. And that book is National Security and Double Government. I wish every American would read this book. It's by Michael Glennon. Glennon's not just some quack. He is a professor of law at Tufts University, and he is a former counsel to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You can read his full biography online. Glennon has spoken at FFF conferences. And Glennon's thesis is a very simple one, very profound one, very ominous one that he documents in great detail, that it is the national security state, the national security establishment, that is really in charge of running the federal government. This was the big change when the United States became a national security state. Everything changed. People don't realize that. They like to think, oh, no, everything's the same, Jacob. Nothing's really changed. We just have a big military, big CIA, a big empire of foreign domestic military bases, NSA to spy on people. No, everything changed. The entire governmental system changed. Our ancestors, the framers, this was the last thing they wanted. They called them standing armies. They didn't call them a national security state, but that was their term for the huge military-industrial complex. Even President Eisenhower, in his farewell address, acknowledged this is a different way of life. He was justifying it. He said it was necessary, which is a bunch of bull. It was never necessary to adopt a totalitarian structure. We could have maintained what we had, our founding system of a limited government republic with just a relatively small basic military force. But the mindset changed, that in order to be kept safe from the Reds, the communists, we needed to adopt a totalitarian type of governmental system. Now, they didn't call it a totalitarian governmental system, but that's what it was. As soon as the conversion takes place, for example, this new branch of government wields the power of assassination. That had never existed before. This is an omnipotent power. When you live under a system in which the government wields the power to assassinate American citizens, that's it. It's over in terms of limited government and freedom and so forth, because if they can assassinate you, that's pretty much as much power as they need. And that power had never existed prior to that time. mean, that was what the Fifth Amendment was about. The American people who founded the country said, we don't want to live under a system where the government's got the power to assassinate us. And so they made it clear, you don't have the power to kill people without due process of law. And that means assassination, because assassination, there is no due process. There's no hearing. There are no formal charges. It's just killing. And then, of course, came the torture, the power to torture, and violation of the cruel and unusual punishments clause. So everything changes. This becomes the most powerful branch of the government. And power is power. I mean, government is power. And so the other three branches didn't have this power. They knew they could not go against this branch of the government. It's like a cancer. It grew and grew and grew until it became the most powerful branch of the government. And it is de facto running the show. This is Glennon's thesis. This is a thesis that I have been emphasizing for many, many years now at FFF. Now, they let the other three branches maintain the veneer of power. So, the Supreme Court issues a ruling of, President Trump has the power to, send troops to Los Angeles, for example. And so it looks like, the Supreme Court's making the call. And, that's because they let them. But the Supreme Court knows that they can only operate within a certain range, a certain ambit, and that if any case reaches there that is contrary to some fundamental principle of the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA, I will guarantee you the Supreme Court's going to fold. I mean, that's why there's this torture and prison center at Guantanamo Bay where trial by jury has been destroyed. And they've been detaining people there for 20 years or so in violation of the speedy trial requirement in the Bill of Rights, because they know who's in charge. And so one of the real insights in Glennon's book is how they permit the other three branches to maintain the veneer of power. Same with Congress. They make Congress think, you're the one to power the purse and all this. But everybody knows that Congress is not going to buck the national security establishment. In fact, the national security establishment arguably has a lot of assets in Congress, sort of like an Operation Mockingbird for Congress, where they essentially control them. And even with the ones that they don't control, everybody knows that if any congressman bucks them, they will just threaten to cancel all military projects in that district, and then the mainstream press in that district goes ballistic and says, we have an ineffective member of Congress, we need to oust him. So they effectively control Congress. And Eisenhower really was going to reference this in his farewell address when he was going to talk about the military-industrial congressional complex. For some reason, at the last minute, he eliminated the word congressional. Well, I think that's exactly what's happening with respect to Trump. I think it's clear that Trump, and this is just my opinion, has thrown in the towel, and that he's made peace with the national security state for whatever reason, where he doesn't have to worry about them trying to oust him from power. But he does their bidding. I don't think this is Trump's call. Look, the national security establishment has hated Iran and the people of Iran ever since 1979. I mean, this goes long before Trump came into office, decades before Trump came into office. It really even stretches back before the Iranian Revolution. But that Iranian Revolution, the Pentagon and the CIA have never forgiven the people of Iran, because the Pentagon and the CIA had installed a pro-U.S. dictator in Iran. They loved the dictator. He was the Shah of Iran. What had happened was in 1953, the CIA had gone in there and instituted a coup that destroyed Iran's democratic system. They had a democratic system in Iran. Their democratically elected prime minister was Mohammad Mossadegh, a very beloved and respected man in Iran. He was Time Magazine's Man of the Year, but he had committed the audacious sin of having nationalized British oil interests in Iran. And this infuriated the British, naturally. So they had gotten kicked out of the country, so they secured the assistance of the CIA to institute a coup. which the CIA did. It was just classic foreign interventionism. Okay? By this time, the national security state had been established. This was 1953. The national security state came into existence in the United States in the late 40s. So now they had the power of coups and interventions, assassination, and so forth. What's surprising is that they did not assassinate Mossadegh, but they instituted a coup that installed a brutal dictatorship. Now, when I'm talking about brutal dictatorship, I'm talking about brutal dictatorship, horrific. The Iranian people were suffering mightily under this dictatorship, and the national police force that the Shah was using to suppress dissent and indefinite detention and torturing people and killing people that opposed his regime, it was trained. It was called the Sabak. It was trained by the CIA. So there was a partnership going on here. But the national security establishment in the United States, which was really running the show, was ecstatic over the Shah. I mean, he was pro-U.S. He was like a puppet. He would do whatever the U.S. told him to do. But in return, they assisted him in destroying civil liberties in Iran. And it takes a long time before people will initiate a violent revolution against their own government. Because they know there's going to be a massive loss of life in that type of revolution. But finally, in 1979, this is after 1953, this is how long they were suffering under this tyrannical dictator, the Shah, they revolt violently, and they take U.S. Diplomats hostage, which, of course, has also never been forgiven, because they were using them as to ensure, like an insurance, to ensure that the CIA did not bring back the Shah, who was being treated for an illness in I think it was New York City. And they wanted to make sure that he didn't come back. But the worst part about this is that they didn't get their democratic system back. They got this Ayatollah theocracy that was arguably just as bad as the Shah's regime. So you got to really sympathize with the Iranian people. I mean, they are the ones that have been paid the price for what the CIA's interventionism did in 1953, but the CIA and the Pentagon have never forgiven them, and so for ousting their little puppet dictator, and so they've never given up hope of having regime change that puts another Shah-like dictator, puppet, pro-U.S. into power there in Iran, and that's what the sanctions are all about. I mean, I really feel for the Iranian people. The U.S. imposes this brutal system of sanctions that stretch all the way back to 1979 that are targeting the Iranian people with death and suffering and starvation and impoverishment. And they've impoverished the Iranian people. It got to a point where Iranians who had been very middle class, high middle class, were having to sell all their personal belongings in order to survive because of the sanctions. And so, the mainstream press has been building up about how powerful Iran is and how it could stand up to Israel and how many casualties and, it's standing up to the U.S. This is pure nonsense. They've had these sanctions there. The Iranians haven't even been able to get, repair parts for commercial airlines. There was a commercial airline several years ago that crashed because of improper maintenance. The sanctions have been extremely effective. In my opinion, Iran is a third-rate power. Okay, yeah, they can fire a few missiles here and there, but, I mean, look, Israel established air superiority immediately. When you got air superiority, you can bomb wherever you want to bomb. You can kill whoever you want to kill, and there's not anything anybody's going to do about it. And Iran was smart, I think, not to retaliate and try to kill a bunch of U.S. soldiers in the Middle East. It looks like things are settling down. Because I think it was a trap. I think that the U.S. national security establishment was hoping that they could do more than just bomb, that Iran would give them the excuse with attacks on U.S. soldiers. And Trump even said that. You kill U.S. soldiers, we're going to come in here and we've got many more sites to bomb. And it was a trap. And I think Iran was smart, or at least so far, not to spring that trap. Even with this attack in Qatar, the military base, they gave them a warning that, hey, we're going to bomb there, because I think they know that if they get in an all-out war with the United States, they will be smashed immediately. thousands of casualties and bombing campaigns. But I have no doubts that that's what the U.S. national security establishment, which is in charge, would love, because they're looking for any excuse of regime change. They haven't given up that quest for regime change. Trump even implied this, and I think at this point, this is totally my opinion, Trump has made peace with the deep state. He decried the deep state both times as he was running for office, decrying the deep state. I think he's made peace with the deep state. He's made peace with the CIA. You never hear him talking about getting rid of the CIA, as Kennedy did. And Trump realizes what could happen to him if he kept up with that kind of language. And the NSA, the Pentagon. And so Trump presents this appearance of, he is the one that called for this bombing campaign. In my opinion, no. He's just being given the appearance like he's in charge. Pentagon and the CIA don't care about appearances. I think he's carrying out their wishes. I think he's made peace with them, and that he is now essentially doing what they want done. In return for that, we don't know what he would have gotten. My hunch is that in return, that if there is a national emergency here in the United States, that they have agreed that they will follow orders, that he declares a national emergency, suspends habeas corpus and due process. They will deploy and not question orders, which is in their interest too. I mean, if they can consolidate power over the American people, they will jump at that opportunity. It's all what Thomas Jefferson said. It's standard ploy that whenever there's people are getting restless over the domestic situation, out of control spending, out of control debt, things looking pretty bad in this country financially, economically, that you stir up a foreign war, foreign enemy. They're coming to get us. The WMDs are here. I mean, we heard this WMD thing 20 years ago with Iraq. Where are those WMDs, by the way? And now again, WMDs, they're going to come with nuclear bombs and so forth. This is what Jefferson said, is a standard ploy. You stir up a foreign war, stir up a foreign enemy. Everybody gets afraid, and then you say, we're going to have to consolidate power to keep you safe. It's sort of like the fox that's herding the chickens into the cage and saying, get on in here, we're going to keep you safe from the danger, the wolf. And then, of course, they close the door and all the chickens are inside the cage, and a few of them start disappearing over time because the fox is taking care of them. So, in my opinion, this is what's going on, that it's the national security establishment that's in charge, and this is the real grave threat to Americans. It's not that there is no threat overseas. Iran is not a threat. The Iranian people are not a threat. Iraq's not a threat. Russia's not a threat. China's not a threat. The real threat to the well-being and the safety of the American people is right here inside the United States. Our founding fathers understood this. Our American ancestors who brought this nation into existence understood this, that the dangers that this federal government would just break out of the restraints and the constraints and become the real destroyer of the freedom and well-being of the American people. And we're seeing that now. That things are getting worse and worse in the United States, both with respect to economically, financially, the Federal Reserve, the out-of-control debt, the paper money system, the welfare state, the warfare state, the war on drugs, the scapegoating of immigrants, the notion that, if we just got rid of the immigrants, everything would be fine, America would be great again. Pure nonsense. That the real threat, the danger to our freedom and well-being is right here inside the United States. And that's what we need to keep concentrating on, is how do we achieve a free society? And I would argue that a necessary prerequisite of that is the dismantling of this dysfunctional totalitarian system known as a national security state, and restore our founding governmental system of a limited government republic. That's my report this week on Trump Watch. Look forward to talking to y'all next week.